Hey everyone, this is John Boyd, host of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. Thanks for joining us and making us a part of your week. Before we dive in, if you're finding value in our content, please give us a like. This helps us reach more listeners and share quality financial education. Next, I'd recommend visiting our website at www.modernwealth.com. Head on over to our Learning Center. It's packed with videos and articles designed to help you optimize your wealth. While you're there, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Thanks again for being with us. Now let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome to another episode of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, John Boyd, certified financial planner, founder, and lead wealth advisor at Modern Wealth. If you have children or thinking about having children and you're looking for what is the best way to set them up financially in the future, this episode is for you. We're going to be talking about all the different ways that you can build wealth for your child. There was a study done by Pew Research, and it found that parents that save for their children, that those children, when they become adults, are more likely to be financially independent. This means that they are more likely to buy homes sooner than their peers. They're going to be more self-reliant. They're more likely to have their own retirement accounts, right? It is a game changer to save for your child's future, and that's why we have an entire episode dedicated to this topic. So, what's on the agenda today? We're going to be talking about custodial brokerage accounts, or UTMA or UGMA accounts. We're going to be talking about 529s. We're going to be talking about trust accounts. We're going to be talking about custodial Roth accounts, and then we'll tie it all together at the end with which one should you pick, because there's a lot of different options. So let's start off with a custodial brokerage account. A custodial brokerage account functionally is just like any other traditional brokerage account that you would open up at a place like Charles Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, you name it. These accounts are typically free or very low cost, and they allow you to invest in really 98% of the investing universe. You can invest in individual stocks. You can buy bonds. You can buy ETFs. You can buy mutual funds, right? I mean, there are going to be thousands of different investment options for you to pick within a custodial brokerage account. Now, with this type of account, you are going to be the custodian of the account, and there is going to be a minor attached to the account. So you are going to be operating this account for their benefit. And then once they turn the age of majority, which is going to be dependent on the state that you live in. So for example, some states, the age of majority is 18, other states it's 25, some states it's 21. It all depends. But you are going to be in charge of this account until they turn the age of majority. So let's say that age is 21. At 21 years old, this account would then convert from a custodial brokerage account into an individual account for this now adult child. So it really is straightforward, right? This is purely just a brokerage account that you invest in. You're going to be steering the ship, and then eventually it's going to be the child's. Now, relatively straightforward, but what do you need to know about this type of account? Well, number one, money that goes into it, it's an irrevocable gift. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, money that goes into it, you can't just casually dip into it and change your mind about it because you want to go shopping, right? It has to be for that child's benefit. Now, keep in mind, they aren't just handcuffed to just educational expenses, right? If you want to use some of that money to buy them birthday presents or a new laptop or a video game system or whatever, you can do that, right? As long as it's for their benefit, that money can be utilized for whatever purpose. The second big thing that you need to know is that these accounts, while super duper flexible, are completely taxable. So they're not going to be tax free. And how they are taxed is through something called kiddie tax. So what the heck is kiddie tax? So with kiddie tax, the first $1,250 of dividends, interest, or gains within this account are going to be tax-free. The next $1,250 of dividends, interest, and gains are then going to be taxed at the child's rate. And then anything over $2,500 a year is going to be taxed at the parent's rate. So depending on how big this account gets, it can potentially get tax inefficient and it can potentially become a little bit messy from a tax reporting standpoint, depending on your comfort level. So again, keep that in mind, is that these custodial brokerage accounts, super easy, super flexible to set up, but they are not tax-free. So if you're hearing all this about custodial accounts, or UTMA or UGMA accounts as they're more formally called, and you're thinking, this sounds pretty straightforward. I want to open up one of those. I mean, what could potentially go wrong, right? Well, here's some of the drawbacks you need to be aware of. We already kind of talked about it, right? It's an irrevocable gift to the child and it's taxable. But I'd say the big drawback that you need to be aware of is the fact that, again, I want to stress it, it's an irrevocable gift to that child. So let me bring this point home with a story. So I remember I was working with a client one time that opened up a custodial brokerage account for their infant child. It was like an investment of around $10,000, and they decided to invest in an incredibly popular tech stock. Now, this tech stock blew up. It went to the moon. That $10,000 investment became a well over 7-figure investment. But here's the problem. The problem is that the relationship between the mother and the child strained, right? The child apparently had a bad relationship with the mom. There was behavioral issues, right? There was all these problems. And guess what? That child was 20 years old and was about to be 21, which was the age of majority, which means that this account was no longer going to be an account that mom was in charge of. It was going to convert to an account in his name that he has 100% control of, that he can do whatever he wants with. So of course, mom is starting to freak out. Holy smokes, this kid with problems, I don't know what he's going to do with this money, but he can't get access to it. So she comes to the firm that I'm working with at the time, panicking, asking, hey, how do I get this money into my name? I want this money in my account. I don't want it to be in this custodial brokerage account anymore. And the answer that we had to give her, and she fought tooth and nail, but the answer we had to give her was, sorry, you can't move this money to your account. And you're explicitly telling us that you're just trying to take it away from them, right? It is clearly not for their benefit, right? By doing that. So again, you need to keep that in mind. It is an irrevocable gift. So if you are ever concerned about how is my child going to behave with money in the future, or how much should I put into that, you need to be aware of that, because eventually this account is going to be theirs. And I use this story of this mom, but I've seen these accounts, what they look like once they convert to the child's account when they're an adult, right? I've seen plenty of these accounts be massive, $500,000, $600,000 accounts for people that are only, 21, 22 years old, right? I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it does happen. And I have seen it. And if that is something that, doesn't sit right with you, you need to be aware of that. So we've talked about custodial accounts. Let's talk about the one that everybody thinks of when they think about saving for a child, and that's a 529. Now, the reason why I say that is that whenever I work with clients and I ask them, what's your strategy for saving for your child's financial future, they almost automatically think that I'm asking them about college savings. And I'm really not, right? Everybody has different views on this. I'd say more and more people that I work with have the view that I don't know what college is going to look like in 20 years. It might not even be that valuable. So I don't know how I feel about a 529 account that is specifically for college saving. So with that being said, let's talk about what a 529 college savings plan is and talk about how it might not be as bad as you think it is, even if your child doesn't go to college. So first and foremost, 529 plan, pretty straightforward. This is an account that you put money into it. The money grows tax-free. And as long as the money comes out for what is called a qualified education expense, so this could be tuition, books, stuff like that. As long as it comes out for a qualified education expense, that money is completely tax-free. So all that growth that has been had in this account for maybe well over a decade is completely tax-free because it's being utilized for qualified education expenses. The other big benefit of a 529 is not only that does it grow tax-free, is that depending on the state that you live in, there may be some tax benefits, right? So while there's not any special tax deductions or tax credits on the federal level for a 529 plan, depending on the state that you live in, your state might offer tax incentives for you to save within their state's 529 plan. You'll need to check your state's 529 laws and college savings laws, but there could be some special tax benefits depending on the state that you live in. So even if your child doesn't plan on going to college, or maybe they change their mind about college, or maybe you just don't know how you feel personally about what college is going to look like in the future, why might it be beneficial to still have a 529 plan? Well, number one, some of the new laws associated with 529s that have just recently passed could give them a little bit more flexibility. So for example, there is a new law in place that will allow for you to put up to $35,000 into a Roth with 529 money, assuming that the account has been opened up for 15 years. In addition to that, 529 plans are interesting because you can port them to different family members. So let's say child number one doesn't go to college, but child number two is, and you had a 529 plan for child number one. Well, you can just simply shift over that money to child number two's tax ID, and now you can use all that money to cover their education expenses. Right? This is a strategy often utilized by very wealthy families, right? This is often called the Dynasty 529 plan, where they supercharge the savings into a 529 and they utilize that money within, maybe multiple 529s and just simply swap them around different family members, different children, grandchildren, right? It could potentially spread out for multiple generations, right? So again, there's that portability factor that gives you some flexibility. So even if child number one doesn't go, there's some leeway there. In addition to that, some argue that even though money that comes out of a 529, if you use it for non-qualified education expenses, you would have to pay ordinary income tax plus a 10% penalty. Keep in mind the principal isn't taxable, but some would argue that the years of compounded tax-free growth, even when you factor all that in, paying the taxes and some penalty maybe isn't so bad, especially depending on the tax bracket that you're in. So again, it's not like the money is trapped in limbo in the 529. You just have to be potentially willing to have the tax implications of distributing from it for a non-qualified education expense. But bottom line is 529 plans offer a lot of flexibility. The reality is that most people, especially now and in likely the near future, are going to pursue some form of higher education like college. And so I'm personally a big fan of them for that particular reason. I don't think everyone should open up a 529 plan, but I do think they make sense in many cases because of those different kind of flexibility elements. So we've talked about 529 plans. We've talked about custodial brokerage accounts. Now let's talk about trusts. When talking about trust, let's break this up into two different parts. So first and foremost, if you were to set up your own revocable living trust for your family, right? So you and your spouse have, let's say, 3 kids. You set up a trust where you put in family assets like the home and non-retirement accounts into this revocable living trust so that when you pass away, you can avoid probate and that it's a seamless transition to the next generation. With those type of trusts, you can build in, customization in terms of what happens with that money when you pass away. So for example, if you want money carved out for, a child's education when you pass away with some of the assets from your estate, if you and your spouse were both to pass away, you could potentially do that with a revocable living trust, right? So that, again, is one of the potential benefits of having a revocable living trust over will, is that in that trust, you can start crafting the language with an attorney on how you want to distribute your estate, what it should be used for, if you want to have specific protections and provisions so the kids don't spend it all, right? All that type of stuff. You can build that into a revocable living trust and give you some protection, okay? So let's just get that out the way. The other part of this conversation is, well, what if you maybe already have that set up, but you want to actually open a separate trust now for your child? Now, why would somebody want to do this? Well, when doing this, again, these trust accounts, if you were to open up a trust for your child, really sky's the limit on the customization of it, right? You could set custom distribution schedules. You can maybe have the trust be set up for multiple children, not just one. You can select who's going to be in charge of it, right? You can hire a professional trustee. I mean, there are tons of different ways you can go about establishing a full-blown trust, right? Now, oftentimes this is more so seen with more affluent families that are looking to maybe shift assets out of their estate, but this can potentially be done, right? And depending on the scenario, right, depending on how much protection you need and customization, right, maybe that's a path that you would want to explore with an attorney. Now, what are the drawbacks of this, actually setting up a full-blown trust for a child? Again, this is not the same as just having protections in your revocable trust. This is, you setting up a full-blown trust now for your child. Well, first and foremost, generally speaking, there's going to be a separate tax ID number associated with that trust. So when this trust is opened up, it's going to have its own tax reporting. It's going to be potentially subject to the trust and estate rates, tax rates, which are much more condensed than the standard tax rate. So it might be more tax inefficient. And just the cost of setting it up could potentially be thousands of dollars. And while in certain scenarios, these trusts can work really, really well, it may not be practical for a lot of people just because the costs associated, reporting, all that good stuff. But again, depending on your family's needs, especially maybe if there's you have a child with, special needs that needs, special care, right? Stuff like that. Maybe this is a conversation where, hey, maybe you explore setting up a full-blown trust for that child. So again, not going to dive into the nuances of the infinite number of trusts that exists, but again, it's a potential option. Next option that I want to talk about. So just to recap to this point, we've talked about trusts, we've talked about 529s, we talked about custodial accounts. Let's talk about custodial Roth IRAs. Everybody loves a Roth, and you could potentially set one up for your child. Functions just like any other Roth. Money goes into it, You've already paid tax on it. It grows tax-free and the money comes out tax-free. However, you can't just open one up and put money into it out of the goodness of your heart. There are some rules that you need to play by if you are going to set up a custodial Roth IRA. So first and foremost, that child needs to have earned income that they paid taxes on. So if your child is a teen and a family hired them to do babysitting and they got paid from that, and they're going to report that on their tax return, great. That money could go potentially into a Roth. The classic lemonade stand example, right? If your child opened up a lemonade stand, started selling lemonade and made money and got taxed on that, right? Obviously, that money could potentially go into a Roth IRA. What can't go into a custodial Roth IRA is just allowance money that you give them, just money coming out of your own funds that you're just trying to gift to them, right? It has to be earned income. But if your child has a job or has means of earning earned income, this can be a really fantastic way to teach them the importance of saving for retirement. So out of all these options, which one should you pick? The reality is that there really is no magic bullet, right? There is no definitive, this is the one that you should pick and the rest of them suck, right? I mean, they all have their own purpose and they're all fantastic. And the reality is you might have multiple, right? In fact, I think that's extremely common. I see that all the time. You know, the dilemma of, I'm not sure if my kid's going to go to college. I'm not sure how I feel about college, but I'll split the difference. I have $500 a month to put towards their savings. Maybe I put $250 into a 529. The other $250 I put into a custodial brokerage account. So half the money can be used for their education. The other half they can use for whatever they want later on down the road, like a down payment on a home. You don't have to just pick one, right? You can pick multiple of these depending on your specific situation. Now, if you're still confused, right? If that was information overload, you still need help. Feel free to reach out to us, www.modernwealth.com. That's modern spelled with no vowels, wealth. We'd love to help you out and help you come up with a plan for your child. I hope you found this episode informative, and we'll see you next time.